partnership. Partnerships are being established with the private institutions to accommodate some of our students. Schools have started to develop their own individual plan for reopening, and we collaborate with them and we guide them in every way we can after looking at their plans. These plans are to be submitted in 2 weeks, and the final plan for implementation will be available in the first week of July. Prime Minister, I just want to end by saying, when I was here last, I seem to have said something that upset some young members of the ministry, students in particular, and associations. Well, I am happy to announce that today I had a very successful meeting with all the representatives of the various organizations and unions. And I think it is fair to say, from my part, and I think the same applies to them, it was a very constructive, informative session. The only thing that may be of concern to you, Prime Minister, is that their demands will require a little more money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Samuda. I think that brings to the end this section of the press conference. We're now open to questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Earlier, we did a test run with members of the media to ensure that, of course, technically we are sound, and the instructions concerning ensuring that their background has no distracting elements, and, of course, that their microphones are turned on once we call on them, and so I expect that the same will be done at this time. Our first question then will come from Ms. Janet Silvera. Janet, good evening.
Good evening, Prime Minister.
Good evening, Janet.
Good evening, all. My question is in relation to visitors coming in, non-Jamaican nationals. I'm not sure. Yesterday, we were told that they will be tested, all persons coming into Jamaica. Today, I'm hearing they will be assessed. Just want to be clear on that. If you could give me some clarity as it relates to that. And this one is to Minister Bartlett. How are we going to ensure that persons remain in the corridors? What methods will be put in place to ensure persons do not go outside of the corridors?
Thank you, Janet, for those two questions. Let me just say that we well understand that given the anticipation, both for Jamaicans coming in and for Jamaicans at home, for the opening of the tourism industry, that there could be misunderstanding of the positions that we have put in the public domain. But just to be clear, we have always been consistent in what we have said, and at these press conferences we go through a very, I want to say, robust presentation of the facts. So we've been doing this now since the 1st of June, and we also explain in Parliament. And our position has always been that we will do a risk-based assessment to inform our testing protocols. Now, for a visitor, a tourist, as you would define them, a non-Jamaican visiting Jamaica for the purpose of tourism, these persons would go through a screening exercise. Everyone coming into Jamaica goes through a screening exercise. That screening exercise has two elements to it. The first element is screening by taking the temperature and observing symptoms. The second element is the risk assessment. And that will be gathered from the information provided on your application to re-enter Jamaica. It will be provided by an interview process, questions that we ask you. It will also be informed by your country or place of origin and your travel history. It will be informed, for example, by exposures that you have had, or whether or not you are part of some high-risk groups that would require us now to take an elevated assessment of you. Now, after going through that assessment process, if you have a temperature, you will be tested, whether you're a Jamaican or a non-Jamaican, a tourist, a business visitor. If you have symptoms, you will be tested, whether you're a Jamaican, a tourist, non-Jamaican resident, whatever, you will be tested. If you go through the assessment for risk and we see that you have a travel history, you are coming from a country that is deemed a country of high risk, you will be tested. So far, we have employed this protocol, and we will employ this protocol on the 15th to the 30th. So if you are a tourist coming from, let's say, New York, or anywhere in the United States for that matter, and you come to Jamaica, you will go through our assessment program, our assessment protocols here, and you will be tested, because the United States would form part of those countries that are considered high risk by the World Health Organization, as is the entire North America and most of South America. Most countries in the Caribbean region would have, by virtue of how they have conducted their health management protocol, their epidemic management protocols, would not necessarily be considered high risk. And therefore, we have to make sure, Jamaica, that we maintain that status. So, to be clear, tourists coming in from countries that are high risk will be tested between the 15th and the 30th of June, at which time we will examine our protocols to see what is the positive rate that we get. And if the positive rate is low and other factors are put into consideration, then we can make a determination as to what we do with testing. But from now to the 15th, from the 15th rather to the 30th, all persons will come into Jamaica. They will go through a screening process. That screening process will inform whether or not they are tested. We can say that anyone coming from a country that is high risk will be thrown up as such in our screening process and therefore will be tested. So just to be clear, the Minister of Tourism, I gather, yesterday in a press conference said all tourists coming in between the 15th and 30th will be tested. If they're coming from the United States, if they can come from Canada, if they're coming from any country that is high risk. And the truth is that 95% of the people who would visit Jamaica during this period anyway would be coming from a country that is high risk. But our policy has always been, it has not varied. There is no reversion or change or anything like that. If you look back at all the press conferences that we have had, Janet, if you look at what we have said in Parliament, everything that we have published, that has been the case, that it is risk-based and the risk assessment will inform the testing. But to the comfort of everyone who feels that we're going to allow people in and not test, the protocol is such that we will probably be testing more than 90% of the people who come in. And then Minister Bartlett.
The resilient corridor is a geographically defined area which would have all the properties that would have been assessed and would have been adjudged to be able to provide almost all the requirements that the visitor would need to have during
their stay for those 2 weeks. As a consequence, it becomes easier for us to manage. It's easy because the hotels literally define what happens, who is there, where they go, and because we have also developed a program for the ground transportation arrangements that will also move in a defined way, we will be able to keep a very close tab on all the visitors who come within those areas. The indications are that the properties that are going to be open anyway are all within that corridor at this time. And therefore, we are satisfied that we will be able to manage the movement within that area and to account for the activities of all our visitors within that space.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Our next question comes from Ms. Dion Jackson-Miller from the RJR Group, fresh from her birthday earlier this week.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Happy belated birthday, Dion. I didn't know. Otherwise, I would have sent you a card.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. I appreciate that. Now, in relation to the announcement, okay, there's a curfew in place, as we know, and protocols for how businesses should operate, distancing, and so on. Why suddenly decide to impose opening requirements on gyms instead of just having them work according to the curfew hours and the various protocols, especially since that's one business that people actually do visit early, and most of them have been opening 5 or shortly after 5 in accordance with curfew. So that's one question. Second, I have to tell you, I'm now completely confused in relation to what the situation is with visitors coming in. It sounds as if you're saying that both what you said and what Mr. Bartlett said are both correct, and they don't sound as if they can be. So can you clarify that? Because it doesn't sound from what you said that everybody is going to be tested, which is what Mr. Bartlett said yesterday. So I'm going to have to ask for a little bit more clarity on that point. And third, what happens if a visitor comes here and then comes down with COVID-19 and wants to go back home? What happens?
Thank you for those questions, Dion. I'm going to ask the Minister of Tourism to join me. But let me again run through the protocols. I think most people get what we're saying, that if you are visiting Jamaica, whether you are a tourist, whether you are a non-Jamaican resident here, whether you're visiting for business, you will go through a screening exercise. That screening exercise, as of the 15th, will do two things. One, we will check for symptoms. Particularly, we will be doing temperature checks. If from that assessment, we see that you should be tested, if you have a temperature or you're showing symptoms, you will be tested. We will also do a risk assessment of your history, that is your travel history, your country of origin. We will also coming to stay in Jamaica if you are a non-national resident or a Jamaican. We will look at the risk group that you're coming from. Several factors will inform the risk profile, and if your risk profile comes out as high, you will be tested. Now, one factor that determines a high risk profile is the country from which you are coming. The WHO gives us a good guide of countries where there is significant spread, enough to concern us that this is high risk. As it stands now, the United States and most of South America are considered high-risk countries. Most countries in Europe are considered high-risk. We get more than 90% of our tourism from North America, Europe, and a very small amount coming from South America. in any event, remember, Dion, we are in a period of controlled entry. So we determine who gets to come in to the island by virtue of asking persons to register. We ask them questions relating to their health. And from that, we are able to already start the risk assessment of those coming in. So we control the entry of persons coming in. So in any event, even before the person arrives in Jamaica, we already have started to develop a risk profile. Now, everyone coming in from the 15th to the 30th, therefore, will, as I said, go through this assessment. If the assessment says you are high risk or you are showing symptoms, you will be tested. So therefore, Dion, almost all persons coming in from the United States will be tested, whether they are coming as tourists, whether they are coming as business visitors, or whether they are coming as Jamaicans. We will test high-risk persons. And I think by virtue of that, I think Minister Bartlett's statement that everyone coming in will be tested, that's the easier interpretation. Minister Bartlett, you want to speak on the other matter?
Which was the other one? What?
Oh, there was another question.
What was the other question there?
If a tourist comes in and tests.
And test positive. Okay.
Yes, and wants to go home, what happens?
Right.
Do we have to?
If I think the protocols were announced that they would be then either quarantined at the hotel where they are, or they would go into a public facility. But we're going beyond that, because as part of the response, we are now discussing with insurance companies and an international logistics company which does repatriation of individuals and or properties that have undergone disruptions or disasters. And that company is in the process of working through with us so that when visitors come and they test positive, they can in fact have the coverage to be repatriated to their homes. So this is an important response that Jamaica is, again, the first country that is working on to ensure that visitors who have been tested positive can have an opportunity to go back home without the airlines taking a position, because as you know, the commercial airlines wouldn't readily take a passenger who is tested positive for COVID.
Just to be clear, Dion, because it's important, and I'm glad you're asking the questions, because there might be confusion in the minds of other persons. Testing depends on capacity. And remember now, we can control the capacity that is coming in. And that is why we have this process of registering on Jam COVID. So we can bring the capacity, that is our resources to test, in line with those who we give the approval to enter. And that is why we can make the commitment that we are making, that during this period, from the 15th to the 30th, we would be able to test almost all coming in. And that almost all is qualified by those who have been screened and assessed as high risk, bearing in mind that the WHO and other factors that we are considering automatically defines persons coming from North America, some countries in South America, some countries in Europe as high risk for spread.
So many people are also waiting on the gym questions.
Oh, the gym, Minister Mackenzie, the question is why now impose restrictions on gyms? We had given guidance to gyms before, but I certainly would have gotten many notes, what are we doing about the gyms? And the Minister of Local Government assessed and gave his pronouncements today.
Yes, Prime Minister. As you rightly said, we did not impose any protocols at the beginning But based on a number of concerns that were raised, we thought it was important. And we have done tests on certain establishments before we took the decision. And you must remember that also we have to ensure that the capacity is not overloaded and that persons are given adequate time to go home before the commencement of the curfew. We have put this in place for 2 weeks. At the end of the 2 weeks, if we see the kind of response that is necessary, then we can reassess and make a further determination. But it is a part of the protocol that we have put in place for all establishments that the public are exposed to.
Thank you, Minister. Prime Minister. Just before we go to Mr. Damon Mitchell of the Gleaner Company, there are a few questions as well concerning what's happening with aquatic centers and pools. We've loosened some of the arrangements, but not pools. Why, sir?
So everything, again, as I said, is risk-based. You know, pools and aquatic centers, many of them require, are enclosed spaces. Many of them are in small spaces relative to beaches and rivers. And we are not yet at that point where we believe we can take that risk just yet. Remember now, we're doing many things in this window. We're bringing in our Jamaicans, we're bringing in tourists, we're opening back rafting, we're opening back parks, we have open rivers. I think we don't want to take, all of these are risks, and we're just taking, I think we have reached our limit in taking the risks. We need to assess, and then come July 1, we are in a better position to understand the impact of these actions on our numbers, and then we'll be able to look at other measures. But I think, you know, we have, where we are now, I think we have expanded as far as we can in terms of reopening certain activities.
Thank you, sir. Let's then go over to Mr. Mitchell, the Gleaner.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Prime Minister, I have 3 questions for the Commissioner. I'll ask 2 now and ask the 3rd after the Commissioner's responses. Commissioner? Yes. Well, first of all, my condolences on the loss of your cops. But can you just indicate for me how chronic is this issue of shortage of bulletproof vests in the Jamaica Constabulary Force? That's question 1. And question 2, can you explain the current system to ensure that only viable bulletproof vests are in use by your members?
Okay, firstly, there is not a chronic shortage of bulletproof vests. We brought in thousands of vests of different types into the country in recent times. Most, if not all, officers have a vest or should have. The other question was the viability of the vests. Well, so bulletproof vests have different ratings. So some of them are level 3A vests that will stop everything up to a .44 Magnum. For rifle rounds and jacketed bullets, it goes up to level 3 and level 4. For level 4 vests, they will stop most anything that is from a relatively small caliber rifle. So that's the range of vests. As you get more protection in these vests, it gets heavier and heavier. And obviously, depending on the work you're doing, you need different levels of protection. I'm not sure if that answers the question you were asking.
Well, are you satisfied with the viability of those which are being used by your members?
Right. What I'm saying is the way you're asking me is they're viable. As a matter of fact, we tested a series of them just recently on the range to see if they still had their ballistic properties, which they do.
How rigorous is your system to monitor deportees with a criminal background? Your officers have been at pains to say there is a system in place.
So if you remember, so somebody who's a deportee and comes back to Jamaica, unless there's a charge here for them in Jamaica, they are actually free to go about their business. and a number of them are not involved in criminal activities. When we detect that they may be involved in criminal activities, then they come under scrutiny from our intelligence services. Clearly, some intelligence led us to this one, who was obviously involved in criminal activities and had illegal firearms, and that's why we were there.
Or though, Commissioner, because I'm not sure there is a structured system of monitoring in place. I know you have said on more than one occasion that you cannot prosecute if there is no crime here committed by the deportees, but is there a structured system of monitoring?
No, what I'm saying, the monitoring of them is similar. You get addresses, you know where they are. They are not required by law to come in and say where they are. They are free to go pretty much, unless they do something here in Jamaica that they are wanted for. If they join a criminal element in Jamaica, then we treat them similarly to all other criminals, and we monitor them, we try to find them, we build cases against them. I think something just
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner, I think the question that was being asked wanted to figure out whether or not the vests issued were sufficient for the purpose, and I think you probably would want to explain that the vests are standard issues, same that will be issued right across.
So, okay, thanks, Kim. So we have, as I say, we have different levels of vests. So our units like our specialized operations, our SWAT team, wear a much heavier vest with a plate, and they have ballistic shields. The police officer who is just about his normal duties and is out there walking up and down for hours and hours in the car, out of the car, and just interfacing with the public, also has a vest, but it will not necessarily stop military-grade rounds from going through it.
So the other issue, Commissioner, would be that the bullet, the weapon that was used was firing military-grade.
That's correct.
Bullets that the standard issue vest would probably not be able to stop.
That's correct. So that's it. You said it, sir. that is it. The point is we did a very aggressive purchasing process over the last year plus, of getting in vests for our members. And for the most part, having gone out, actually, because I spend a fair amount of time on the road interfacing with members, and for the most part, the ones I've come across have been issued with vests.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to say quickly that the criminals are using high-powered weapons. There are many times military-grade weapons, rifles firing high-velocity rounds. That standard issue or even SWAT issue gear might not always be able to stop. This, unfortunately, was one such case where, from what we have seen, Commissioner, the teams were vested, but some of the bullets may have penetrated.
Yeah, that's what we have seen so far. Again, this is something that we have to, so once you do an operation like this, every aspect of it has to be analyzed to see what happened, what we can change, what we should have done, how can we, from this, better protect our officers and their lives. But certainly we had and have been investing in protection for our officers. No question about that. Thousands of vests have come in.
Thank you so much, sir. Are we on the monitor? All right.
You had a third question, you said, Damien?
Is it that
I just wanted a bit of clarification on the basis of what the Commissioner just said a while ago. Am I hearing him saying that the officers wore standard issue vests to this operation, and based on his reconnaissance, it would have required more than distended issue?
So we actually have to do a debrief on the operation. When I went out there, the officers involved, a lot of them were pretty shook up. We have 2 dead, 2 who are, fighting for their lives. I know one of them, he got shot below the vest in the pelvic region, and so on. So we will have to go through this in some detail, and when we do, we'll put out something on it. I prefer not to go any further on this. Okay?
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Prime Minister, I have a question on, well, an appeal really from persons on social media belonging to the faith community. They're asking, sir, concerning the protocol about no air conditioning. There are some churches apparently that are rented spaces that are enclosed as well, and the door alone will not accommodate. They've asked on social media that you, sir, and the cabinet reconsider.
The chief medical officer is here. I'm not going to put her on the spot, but we will contemplate it, but just bear in mind that so far what we have seen, not just in Jamaica but worldwide, that recirculated air conditioning is one of the factors that promotes the spread, and therefore that has to be carefully considered. You will notice, Naomi, that when we have increased the numbers in our public transportation, we have also said that they must keep their windows down so that there is adequate airflow.
All right, wonderful. And so, sir, that concludes our questions for today. If you would, you could recap.
Sure. We've done it in good time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so